Welcome to episode 18 of Let's Rage Together, a podcast where two friends talk about the politics of total liberation and related topics.
We annihilated the world before your very ears.
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 18th episode of Let's Rage Together. I'm Taryn.
And I'm Pete.
Today we're taking a look at some of the strategies used by animal rights activists and talking about how some of these might come across to non-vegans specifically. Some of what we discuss is based on listener questions, and we also have some follow-up from previous episodes.
If it's the first time you're listening to this podcast, welcome. If you're looking for some calm and peaceful discussion about plant-based eating and feeling good about life, this is probably not going to be the podcast for you and might be a bit of a disappointment, but hopefully you'll stick around anyway.
What we are is a podcast about total liberation, and we discuss topics like feminism, anti-speciesism, political veganism, anti-fascism, consistent anti-oppression, anti-racism, and other related topics from a radical left or anarchist perspective. So if you're interested in any of that, then you are in the right place.
And if you like what we're about and you like what you hear, you can always find the rest of our episodes and more info at letsragetogether.co.za. There's also a list on the site of all the places you can listen. You can contact us directly on Instagram and Facebook. The handle is at Let's Rage Together Podcast. Or email us with any comments, questions, concerns, episode suggestions, whatever, to mail@letsragetogether.co.za. If you want to support what we're doing, you can become a monthly Patreon supporter. You can find us on patreon.com/Let's Rage Together for anything from $1 a month, or you can make a once-off PayPal donation. The details are all on the site. And if you aren't in a position to do that, or you just don't want to, which is fine, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us an iTunes review or share our episodes and just tell people about the podcast.
Yeah, and on that note, we want to give a shout out to Mimi and Mark for both becoming Patreon supporters. Thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. And your goodies will be in the post to you very soon.
So in this episode, we'll be mentioning some sensitive issues. Just a content warning, we'll be making mention of abortion, sexual assault, and violence. And sorry if we leave out anything. We're going to start off today with some previous episode follow-up.
Yeah, so first of all, in episode 11, I had mentioned the abortion ban in Alabama in the Bad and Rad segment, which, by the way, seems to have been temporarily blocked by a federal judge. So that's some good news.
That's the ban and not our episode.
Yes, the ban has been blocked. But I recently received a message from a listener, Risa, who brought to my attention that I spoke in very binary terms, referring only to women's bodies when I spoke about abortion. So I went and re-listened to the segment, and they're absolutely right. So I just wanted to apologize for that. I realized that I came across in a way that could be perceived as very trans-exclusionary, and I hadn't even realized that I was using such binary language. So I sincerely apologize for that. And thank you, Risa, for bringing that to my attention and being so kind about it. As we've mentioned before, we do this podcast to challenge ourselves and to learn in the process. So I would be pretty disappointed if nothing had changed since we started the podcast. I have no doubt that I've probably said things in earlier episodes that I would cringe at if I heard now.
Well, same.
Yeah. So if you are a new listener and you go and listen to any of our earlier episodes, please just keep in mind that we are humans and we're growing and learning as we go. But also, absolutely, please let us know if we've said anything that's out of line or that you think we were mistaken about. Please just let us know so that we can also learn from it and be better going forward. So yeah, thank you again to Risa for bringing that to my attention. And obviously we realized that, when we're talking about sensitive issues like abortion, that absolutely doesn't just apply to women. Anyone who has a uterus and can get pregnant, that conversation would have been relevant to you. So again, apologies for that very binary language.
Yeah, thanks, Risa. And I can't say it better than what T said. So we spoke about our opinions on doing vigils outside of slaughterhouses in episode 16, Rebellion and Revolution, where we spoke about a photo that AR Zone posted on Facebook questioning the effectiveness of vigils. We decided to post a question on our Instagram stories and got a couple of responses. We thought we would share some of these. So we've kept them anonymous in case anyone doesn't want their handles to be read out loud. And for future reference, when we ask questions or do polls or anything on any of our social media platforms, you'll always be anonymous unless you request otherwise. So these are some of the responses that we thought were the best to share. I think they're good because when I show footage, it feels more real to my followers. They know me personally, and in my experience, when I'm the one filming, the non-vegans react to it / ask questions, etc. Whereas when I show clips from, say, Dominion, there's no reaction. But I don't think we're doing anything particularly amazing for the non-human animals. It's education more so than anything. I don't think they feel the love I give when I look at them without my camera. But I do it otherwise because it feels weird to not connect with them, and it feels like I'm taking advantage of them when I only speak with them through a camera, if that makes sense. I hope they feel the love, but I imagine they're mostly just confused what's going on.
Another person said that they are ineffective and leading to rapid activist burnout. Another person said perhaps becoming an issue with desensitized behavior to what is being witnessed. Valid
So
point.
the desensitization is what we mentioned in the episode, I think.
Yeah.
Someone just said weird.
Another person said speciesist causes burnout, ineffective.
Yeah, it would be interesting to have a discussion on how they could be speciesist. Someone said definitely not for everyone. Solidarity is a key concept not all activists understand when they're.
Another one says needs to be paired with effective, in-depth anti-speciesist education.
Agreed.
Educating who though? Are you talking about showing when you show the footage?
Oh, yeah, or for the activists, I guess, as well.
Good point.
Someone else said speciesist. I used to take part in them often, but not anymore.
Someone else said, I feel it's important to have a presence outside a slaughterhouse to show the community the injustices other animals face. However, we need to be respectful and only have a few people bearing witness, preferably activists with good cameras. It's completely unnecessary to have crowds of people surrounding the trucks. This only scares the animals and confuses them even more. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that echoes what we spoke about in the episode too. Another person said, protest, stop the trucks. Don't have a relations with the SH. Occupy, stop it. I'm guessing SH Slaughterhouse.
Yeah. Someone else said, I used to organize it, but it traumatized me, so I stopped. It's necessary, though, for people to see and to show footage they filmed themselves of the local animals to people they know personally.
Someone else said it's ineffective and more focused on the activists than the animals themselves, which I think is a relevant point because we also pointed out sometimes it can feed people's narcissism if you say, like, film yourself crying with these pigs in a truck behind you. I think that's where the idea of them possibly being speciesist comes in.
Yeah.
If we would allow the trucks to even pass, and if we would be filming, if there were humans in there.
Sure, yeah.
Another person said, would like to see research on its effectiveness before advocating it. And I think that's the answer to that is probably going to be very similar to street outreach in that you just can't know what kind of effectiveness it's having, you know?
I think even less so with this because you're not advocating directly to people. You are filming footage while you're there, and then that is essentially being shared online. You don't know where, you don't know who's reacting, who's seeing it. A lot of people are seeing and not responding. So it's even more kind of removed than speaking one-on-one to someone where you can get some kind of feedback from them. So I think that would be really hard to gauge any kind of effectiveness. Someone else said, saw this image a week or two ago. It really hits hard. The line, would we be doing this if it were people? Just like you said.
Someone else said, good for potential vegans and activists when not used for human photo op.
Yep. Someone else said, I live in an ag-heavy state and the best way we can show what's happening is footage from vigils. Also relevant.
Yeah. I mean, that one that we went to here that we mentioned in episode 16 about the NSPCA using the footage and photos to kind of lodge a case against them could be used as a pro argument.
Yeah.
Another person said, emotionally draining, traumatic, not for everyone.
Also agreed. I don't think anyone should ever feel pressured to do vigils. Another person said, best when participants avoid contact or communication with workers.
I don't really understand this comment, to be honest. Why would you avoid speaking to workers?
I guess maybe if you're thinking of it in terms of some activists being aggressive towards slaughterhouse workers, but I can't really imagine why else.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that it would probably be a good thing to share a connection with workers and find out what their experiences are, especially seeing as most slaughterhouse workers are exploited in their positions, and they have like really dangerous jobs with really shitty pay. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and for us to stop demonizing slaughterhouse workers.
Well, maybe that's what this person is trying to get across, that, you know, if there are activists that are going to demonize them and try and blame them for what's going on, then that's obviously a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And especially when a lot of people in the mainstream vegan movement look up to leading activists, say like Gary Orofsky, who in his one video talks about going into slaughterhouses and, you know, aiming a gun at a slaughterhouse worker and saying, drop the knife. You know, it would be, for me, more effective for the vegan movement for us to kind of build solidarity with workers rather than to demonize them and to make them out like, you know, that there's something wrong with them. They have shitty jobs and they're exploited themselves. And I think like it would be great if vegans could stop demonizing slaughterhouse workers and we could realize that they aren't the ones to blame for the exploitation of animals. They're just part of the system. Another person said, they certainly are not an effective standalone tactic and need to be accompanied by thoughtful, anti-speciesist, anti-oppression focused educational messaging and coupled with other tactics. I think there is a place for them in helping people on the fence make connections, but there is too much focus on vigils in lieu of other tactics and far too much focus on the activists attending them, which I have been guilty of and understand the impact of now. Activists who are knowledgeable about species-specific behaviors of the individuals on the trucks who can be respectful of their space while still showing them kindness is key. The issue is too many people and a huge shift in focus onto the activists involved and away from the animals. Admittedly, I am torn because I see the benefit to a degree, but I also struggle with how I would feel if I were the one in the truck myself. While traumatizing for many, I also feel as though vigils can be more easily accessible for people who want to be active, but don't feel comfortable with protests or more direct action. If we take some time to educate on the potential dangers, in brackets, exploitation, speciesist behavior, etc., of vigils, and have more informed activists, I think it would help. I have tried to use my experience at vigils, not just to educate myself, but others as well, and I think that education is paramount.
I definitely 100% agree with all of that.
Yeah, great comment.
Another comment was disrespectful, not helpful, and scared the non-human animals in trucks more.
So another person said, weird action when you think about what's happening in the slaughterhouse. In a way, I agree. It feels like a very weak response to a truck of animals that are about to be transported and killed. You know, and you're going to take some photos and give them water and try to give them love. You know, it feels like the action required should be a lot more drastic to meet the severity of what's about to happen, you know.
Yeah, I think the next comment actually ties into what you're saying here. The person said, weird, because if we want people to be outraged by this, we should act like it ourselves.
Yeah,
so that's exactly what you're saying, I guess.
Someone else said, is there any media evaluation on how it is perceived by mass media / press? Don't find it effective. I'm not sure.
I actually haven't seen anything in the media about it.
Yeah.
Well, not here anyway, but I don't know about overseas.
I mean, I guess it goes against industry interests to show like the condition of animals that arrive at slaughterhouses on trucks. So I doubt that many would. And even a lot of the independent media outlets will be run by people who consume animals anyway.
Yeah, I wonder if vigils would be more effective if there was more of a strategy behind what to do with the footage afterwards. So obviously, I personally see the benefit in getting that footage to share and not overdoing it, but just having enough to show people what's actually happening, at least before they get into the slaughterhouse. But I think maybe it would be more effective if we had some kind of plan to actually get it into the media, not just social media and personal pages where you often in this like vegan echo chamber. But, you know, what if we had this big campaign where it was like, I don't know, like a 3-day vigil kind of thing, non-stop, stopping every single truck, and get all of the media outlets there that you can, or have a plan to send the footage to media outlets. I don't know, maybe that's just off the top of my head now, but maybe that would actually be a way to get it to be a little bit more effective.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really into the idea of activists kind of torturing themselves, so not like staying there for 3 solid days, but I get what you mean, like finding out when the trucks go there exactly.
Yeah, but I'm not necessarily even the same group of people, but just to put pressure on them to say, like, we're not going to leave until this is on the news. But I mean, I don't even know if that would be effective. I'm just thinking in terms of this person's question, has anyone actually thought about putting the focus on getting this stuff into kind of mainstream media? I don't know. I mean, I haven't actually thought of that before. So that's some of the responses that we got. And it seems like a lot of them focus on the importance of making sure the focus is not on the activists, but on the animals. And then also, obviously, the comment about speciesism, I think, is something that we should all be mindful of. We probably wouldn't be filming the situation if it was humans. And I think we mentioned that briefly in the episode, that while that's true, I think if I was in a truck like that, I think I would want people to film if that was the only way that they could get some kind of story out. But I definitely agree with the people who say it's just one small part of diversity of tactics that we need to use.
Yeah, and it would be, say there was a group on the truck like that were of a different ethnicity or something like that, and like a bunch of white people were going there and taking pictures and like giving the people water and stuff. Imagine how disrespectful and like racist it would look if you turned the selfie camera on and filmed yourself crying outside of this truck full of people. Would look ridiculous.
Yeah, I think we have to be very mindful of that, and mindful how we come across, mindful about the motives behind everything that we do, whether it's how we film, how we speak about what we saw. But I think it's also important to realize that the difference here is that non-human animals, while they do show agency and they do resist what happens to them, they also don't have the language that we have to resist. They don't have the capabilities a lot of the time to mobilize in groups the way that humans do. So in many ways, they can't mobilize together for themselves and on behalf of themselves. So in that sense, we are allies to them and essentially need to somehow bring awareness to their plight in ways that they are not able to in the current situation. So I think there's a place for it, but while being mindful of all of those things.
Yeah, and especially being mindful of trying to center the animals instead of centering ourselves, which seems to be happening a lot at the moment with a lot of activists.
Yeah, so we've spoken about vigils a couple of times now, and obviously if you have any more comments or you think we've missed a key element of this, we'd like to hear from you and to think more about it. I still have mixed views about them. I still think there's a place for them. I think the way they're done sometimes can have a lot of issues attached that I think we need to be mindful of, and I think we need to speak to each other about as activists and to educate each other and make sure that there's none of this like hero worship, look at me crying bullshit going on. Yeah,
or consistent desensitization and traumatization of yourself by like going every week. Is it necessary? Once you've gathered content, then what are you going for? You're not really like saving those animals.
Yeah, aside from the follow-up visits where, like we spoke about in the last episode, in episode 16, and we mentioned how sometimes the footage can lead to prosecutions and things like that, which obviously we're looking in a welfare context and we're looking at what is actually possible within the realms of the law. But, as much as that's not really going to help animal liberation, it can help to take some cases to court. It can make things difficult. It can, lead to some economic damage, I guess. So in that sense, going to multiple vigils might have a benefit. But like you say, you have to be aware of burnout. You have to be aware of traumatizing yourself and looking after your own mental health, because it's not worth it just to get a little bit of extra footage. Yeah. Once you have something that can show people the reality of the situation, then that should be all you need. And other than that, you should be looking to do other things.
Yeah, well, that's a point I was going to make as well, is often it's the only thing going on in a lot of places. And so people just join every single one to feel like I'm doing as much activism as I can, when really both of us feel, I think, that it shouldn't be happening so often. And that you don't need like tons and tons of people there.
And even if you feel better having gone there and having got footage and having done something, there's no denying, no matter how strong you think you are, no matter how able you are to cope with seeing what you've seen, it is soul destroying seeing those trucks go into the gates. It's soul destroying to not be able to stop them and actually liberate those animals. It's really, really hard. No matter what position you're coming from, no matter how strong you are emotionally and psychologically, if you care about animal liberation, you are going to be affected by seeing that truck go in after you've been there. and you know they're going to die. So there's no escaping that.
And it's hard when you see animals that are injured, like when we went outside of that beef slaughterhouse and there was a downed cow.
Yeah, and then you've got to still email SPCA and wait for a response and see if they follow up and show them the footage, by which time that animal is dead.
Yeah, so that sucks.
And that animal didn't know that you were like advocating on their behalf.
Yeah.
They just died.
But I agree with you about the pro. That's one of the pro that you said, that agitation could be good. You know, even if you're not saving the animals or whatever, kind of delaying stuff or somehow economically impacting the meat company or just even pissing them off is maybe worth it sometimes.
And it does start to get to that. Like I saw that here where, you know, you have these slaughterhouse managers that are all friendly when they hear about the protest and all like, yeah, it's fun, do what you want. You know, they act like they're not fazed, but you stay there long enough, you stop enough trucks, and eventually they start sending people out to see what the activists are doing. They start like pacing, and you can see they're like visibly agitated, like, can you just leave now? So in that sense, you know, maybe it's a good way to put a bit of pressure. But I do think there are other things that could be done, like incorporating some kind of media involvement or doing something to really show them that you're going to damage their reputation, if nothing else.
Like tactics that can complement the vigils and doing stuff that the vigils complement as well.
Like waiting for all the animals to be gone and throwing some petrol bombs over.
We would never advocate
for
that. We also wouldn't advocate for anyone doing graffiti on the walls just before you leave. You know?
Or letting down tires, like after the animals have been offloaded and the truck has to leave again, like if you could somehow let down their tires, you know, I don't know who would do that.
Don't stop it. Why would you suggest something like that?
I'm not suggesting.
You
I'm
are
just
so
saying.
Irresponsible.
I'm just saying some people might do that. I personally wouldn't advocate
Irresponsible.
for that.
Irresponsible.
Don't break the law, kids. Anyway, we also got a comment from Kim about our last episode. Kim had messaged us and gave some nice feedback about the last episode 17. So thank you for that, Kim. But she also just pointed out that we had mentioned that it's racist for vegans to put up videos saying things like vegan versus Muslim. And Kim said that one thing, Islam was conflated with race 1 or 2 times in the podcast. Vegan versus Muslim video titles have absolutely nothing to do with race, and it's racist to assume such. I assume you both agree, and it was just a slip during a passing comment.
Okay, so thanks for the comment, Kim. I understand the misunderstanding, and I just want to apologize if I offended anyone. Technically, you're right. Muslims aren't a race. They are globally made up of many, quote, races. That said, we do think that Islamophobia is very much tied to racism. We were trying to point out that video titles of vegan outreach, such as Vegan vs. Muslim, can create an environment where racism and Islamophobia are more readily tolerated and excused, and perpetuate hatred towards groups of people. I think that some other people clarify this better than I can, so I just thought I'd share a few quotes from an article on HuffPost called "Muslims Aren't a Race, so I Can't Be Racist, Right? Wrong." So some of these quotes are: there is a new type of racism, cultural racism. Racism is no longer about race, in brackets skin color, but culture. People are othered and discriminated against, not simply because of the color of their skin or other phenotypes, but because of their beliefs and practices associated with some imagined culture. Cultural racism, therefore, happens when certain people perceive their beliefs and customs as being culturally superior to the beliefs and customs of other groups of people. Cultural racism, in turn, reproduces the idea of the hierarchy of cultures, meaning, in the context of current affairs, that our, in quotes, Western culture is superior to, quote, their Islamic culture. So it's that us and them thinking, you know. This way of thinking is problematic because it essentializes diverse classifications like, quote, Westerners and, quote, Muslims. It creates a binary of Western equals civilized and Islamic equals uncivilized. There is nothing rational about Islamophobia. Treating Muslims poorly because they are Muslim is racism. It's that simple. If someone gives a Muslim woman wearing the hijab a dirty look, sorry, but you are racist. If someone assaults a Muslim woman wearing the hijab, which has recently happened in Toronto, yep, you are a racist. Time to face the music. Ultimately, the issue here is racism without race, as sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva calls it. The more we assume that race is limited to skin color, the less we understand about contemporary racism faced by Muslims at home and abroad. Now is the time to teach youth that racism is much more than the white-black dichotomy. Racism is changing in its form, but the beast is still very much alive and well. For anyone that wants to read more about this, check out the article called Muslims Aren't a Race, So I Can't Be Racist, Right? Wrong? On HuffPost. We'll also link to some other articles in the show notes, including a University of South Australia paper by S. Saeed called Racism and Islamophobia.
Yeah, so although we acknowledge that Islam is not limited to one racial group, you're absolutely right about that, Kim. There have been attacks on people based on their physical appearance because of an ignorant assumption that they are part of a religion or a specific group. So thanks very much, Kim, for bringing our attention to that point. You make a very valid point, and I hope that we clarified our position a little bit better now.
Speaking of George Martin, thanks to everyone for the great feedback on our last episode, which was a response to his Carnism Debunked video, quote, debunking us and all the other, quote, intersectionals. Recently, the Cranky Vegan played the same clip of George's idea of inclusivity being men's rights activists marching alongside feminists marching alongside Trump supporters, and commented on this. So go watch the Cranky Vegan's video called 3-Minute Thursdays, Vegan, Trump and Lindgren and New Anti-AR Laws on YouTube, and then check out the comments section to see him still on his arrogant, ignorant, petty, uninformed right-wing rampage.
Yep, him being George Martin, not Cranky Vegan. It's quite enlightening, to say the least. So have fun. Moving on to the bad and the rad.
It's time for the bad and the rad.
If this is your first time listening, the bad and the rad section is where we speak about things that we think are bad or rad, whether they relate to us personally or they're massive global issues or anything, that we feel like don't maybe warrant a full episode but still deserve a mention. So any bads or rads today, T?
Yeah, so just one rad, which I think we can both agree on. There's a new podcast to check out run by Steve from Animal Resistance.
Tofu Steve.
Shout out to Steve.
Tofu Steve.
So he has started a new podcast called Beyond Species Podcast, and it's basically a podcast speaking about all things speciesism. And the first episode is out, so definitely check that out. It's an interview with Shona from the Raw in You YouTube channel, and she speaks about her experience working on a dairy farm and the myth of the humane farm.
It's actually a very powerful episode for anyone who thinks that the dairy industry could be humane ever in any kind of situation.
Yeah. So definitely check that out. We will leave a link in the show notes to the episode so that you can go have a listen, and also just give a little search on Instagram and follow them there as well. So next up is actually a follow-up from a previous episode where we discussed a maybe, which was the Game Changers documentary, which we had not watched yet. And we figured it could be good, it could be bad. We weren't really sure. We weren't sure if it was going to be fat-shamey or problematic. So after all of that speculation, we have since both watched it. So Pete, what did you think of the Game Changers?
So it was a maybe for me, and I actually watched it thinking, wow, this is going to be terrible. I can't believe I'm about to put myself through this. But honestly, I was actually quite impressed by the documentary. It wasn't fat body, food, or disease shaming like I thought it would be pretty much at all. I thought it was pretty inclusive in a lot of the language used throughout the movie. One thing is that I don't think there was very good non-male representation. So if you're just looking at the athletes and not the scientists, there were only 2 women athletes versus 13 male athletes, which I think is not very accurately representational.
I also believe that there were some other interviews with women that were cut, which doesn't make sense to me. Like, if there aren't many interviews with women, you should keep them all in.
Yeah. But
I do think that the women they included, I was quite pleasantly surprised that it was a woman of color and then a woman who is in her 40s, which, let's face it, women in their 40s generally don't get represented pretty much anyway. So I did think that was a good thing.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more cynical in that maybe it's quite tokenizing to have, like, try fit all the diversity you can, in as few people as possible.
I understand that totally, but I didn't get the impression that that's what it was. I didn't think that those women were chosen to be tokenized. I think that they were chosen on valid merit and like what they had to say. And I was just pleasantly surprised that it wasn't just like these, the stereotypical woman that you would see in fitness kind of media.
Yeah. No, I was, I don't mean to diminish them as athletes at all. They're both incredible athletes. I just think that 2 to 13 is like not a great ratio.
Yeah.
But I also really enjoyed personally like Scott Jurek in it, because I guess I'm a bit of a fanboy about him. He's an amazing ultramarathon runner. So that was cool. The one thing I was pretty put off by was the whole like penis erection segment. And I thought that comment by the doctor where he said something like, when I think of what a real man is, I think of this and this and this, and his sexual prowess. So to me, that whole segment felt like this very like patriarchal overpromise of go vegan and you'll have an amazing erection and be good at sex. And I think that's super misleading and simplistic and honestly pretty silly, especially during that one part where those 3 guys are like giggling about the results, that shows, your erection was this much harder and it lasted for this much longer and whatever. And I feel like it's going to be, or might have already been, a reason why some people have decided to go vegan or like adopt a plant-based diet, because it's not really a vegan documentary. It's more about like benefits of plant-based eating. And I think that kind of sucks. I think that they could have framed the whole thing in a much more scientific, less jokey way and add in the other factors that contribute. So, for example, erectile dysfunction can be caused by any number of things, including mental health issues or sleep or exercise. And the evidence, honestly, is like really anecdotal. And I think we've seen in the past with other vegan documentaries, it doesn't help the vegan movement when we mislead people, like comparing, say, protein of beef versus protein of broccoli or something like that. If you misrepresent things or you have false facts or you have anecdotal evidence, it doesn't always help, although they admit it in the documentary. But I just think the research hasn't been done yet to empirically state anything like they seem to be heavily implying. And even though they didn't explicitly make the claim, to me, the whole segment at least very heavily implied it. I don't know how you felt about that section, T.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And I think the quote that you mentioned where the doctor said, when I think of a man, I think of sexual prowess, that was like incredibly problematic, I thought. Like that was unnecessary and patriarchal, like you said, and very binary and just shitty. It's a shitty thing to include. I don't think this segment was unnecessary or kind of excessive entirely, but I think the way it was framed was not great. I think it was very clear that they were trying to appeal to people
like the guys that they used.
Yes, exactly. It was very clear they were trying to appeal to those people, and fair enough, maybe that will get through to people like that and get them to adopt a plant-based diet. But it's sure as shit not doing anything for animal liberation or understanding the ethics of veganism. But that said, the documentary didn't claim to be that, didn't claim to be an ethical documentary. And like you said, they did say very clearly this is anecdotal, there isn't sufficient evidence. The problem is, though, while the documentary is clear that the evidence is anecdotal, I think we need to be aware of how this information is portrayed, like you were saying, and how we show this information to non-vegans. Because I've seen a few people sharing this info in a way that could misrepresent the claims made, which is not the fault of the documentary. It's the fault of the people sharing these claims and sharing the information that is, in a way, saying that this is fact, this is research-based, and it's not, it's anecdotal. And I think that a lot of people have shared it knowing that it will appeal to people who have more self-interest and people who don't have much concern for social justice and animal rights. And I think that's a problem because you're trying to sell people on these claims that are really weak. But having said that, I do think it's still an important segment, but I think they could have framed it in a completely different way. They could have cut out the laughing at the results. They could have cut out the shitty doctor statement about sexual prowess. And they could have included things that, like the fact that having erectile dysfunction can be an early warning sign for cardiovascular disease, which we all know can be linked to the consumption of animal products. That is a real concern for people's health, and that is a real warning sign that people should be aware of.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue that I have is just the implication of this over-promising of veganism. Like, if you tell someone, if you go vegan, you won't get sick, and then they get sick, then they're going to think they're bad vegans, and it's most likely, well, not most likely, but they might give up veganism. Same as if you tell someone who's struggling with erectile dysfunction or something like that, oh, if you go vegan, it'll be fixed, and then it isn't. Like, maybe they go see a psychologist, and the psychologist tells them, oh, your sleep is really bad, or you have like stress you need to manage, and that's the issue. They might see veganism as like, oh, well, that didn't help me at all, or they might go vegan and still suffer with erectile dysfunction, and then think they're like a bad vegan, or, you know, it has implications of shame, just like disease and body shaming and fat shaming.
For sure. And I think that's where, as activists, we have to be responsible with what we do with information, whether it's anecdotal or scientific. We have to be careful of how we come across, even if we're not explicitly overpromising. I think things can be phrased in such a way that implicitly overpromises, and that's also an issue. And like I said, it's not always the fault of like the documentary makers. In certain situations, it's people taking like a screenshot of one part of the documentary and saying, look at this, you'll be healthier. And, you know, it's people warping that information as well. So for me, I think the main issue is with any of these kind of information documentaries, if you're going to use that information to advocate, use it responsibly and don't misrepresent things, because you're not doing anyone any favors, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, this is really the only segment where I had an issue with the documentary, to be honest. I really enjoyed everyone's parts. I watched it with my parents, actually, and my mom kept asking, like, yeah, but what do they eat? And I really loved that in the documentary they show like this very diverse food preference, you know?
Yeah, everything from healthy salads to like pizza and...
Yeah, so from the cycling woman, you know, she was having like broccoli with tahini, and then the one weightlifter guy was like pizzas, burgers, pancakes. And I think that's cool to have showed that diversity. And while this whole like vegan superhero, hero worship vibe, it doesn't really do much for me, I still found some things like really impressive. You know, like that guy who's 60. And
yeah,
just
so badass.
Oh my gosh, like
I was like, I feel so weak and lazy right now.
It comes in and he's just smashing the pull-ups. Yeah. Rippling muscles all over his back, and he's like, I'm 60. And even my parents were like, gasp, you know, like, And then also that guy Patrick, he's quite a cutie, eh? He lifted over 1/2 ton. Like, that's, yeah, there was some stuff that I was like, I wasn't really expecting to be impressed by the documentary, and I found some stuff pretty impressive.
What wasn't impressive? You know where I'm going with this, Pete.
Yeah.
Good old Uncle Arnie.
Oh, gosh. I mean, the bearded vegans pointed this out, but why did he have a stuffed alligator behind him every time he was in the movie?
Right? So, like, how did no one filming think, like, so we're talking about plant-based eating here? Should we maybe move the dead animal out of the shot?
But as we found out later, he doesn't actually care about dead animals, right?
No, because he gave turkeys away for Thanksgiving. What a fucking champ.
But I guess he was an executive producer of the documentary, so he had to be in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think overall it was a pretty good documentary, and it's better if you don't see it as like a vegan documentary.
Yeah.
It's about the benefits of plant-based eating. It proves unequivocally that you can get enough protein on a vegan diet. And I think it would have been cool to include some other athletes, but I think it was pretty good.
And also, I mean, we don't know how they went about looking for people who wanted to or didn't want to be involved, who they asked, who they didn't ask. So overall, I think they did a pretty good job. And I have heard a lot of people saying that, you know, people they know that are so anti-vegan came across the documentary by chance and watched it, and now they're actually asking questions about veganism and considering plant-based eating and stuff. So I guess that's kind of a positive, but like I said, it's not going to do anything for animal liberation. It's not going to make people's ethics just suddenly explode into their consciousness or anything like that. But, you know.
I thought it would have been cool to include someone like Fiona Oakes, who's like a really badass ultramarathon runner, but also runs a sanctuary. I think that could have blended very well the athlete thing and an ethics thing.
For sure.
But I'm not sure, what rating would you give it? out of 10.
I always feel so pressured to give ratings. Like Goodreads gives me anxiety.
Yeah, but it's also so few stars that you can give.
I know, it bugs me. Like, why only have 5 stars? 4 is like quite good, but like 5 is like too perfect.
Yeah,
but
they should
sometimes
have-
it's more than a 4.
They should have like 30
Yeah.
or something.
So you can give it like 28 out
Yeah.
of 30.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I
Um,
don't know. Ratings are too much pressure for me.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. But I don't know. It depends. Are you rating it in terms of like what it will do for veganism? Are you rating it in terms of like what it is and what it promised to be? Because in terms of what it promised to be, I'd probably give it like a 9 out of 10. Like it is just
Yeah.
showing
was-
what it shows.
And it was way better than I was expecting it was going to be.
Yeah, and that doctor dude literally took away that last star. Like, okay, no, nothing's perfect. So maybe 8 out of 10.
Yeah. And at least at the end of the documentary, they do speak about environmental ethics and the impacts on the earth and everything.
I don't remember that. Did they?
Pretty sure. They speak about water usage and Damien Mander with the
Oh,
wildlife.
right. Yeah. So, see, that wasn't very memorable for me, and that you'd think that would be important for me. So maybe it's a 7 out of 10. I think you were right.
So yeah, what did you think about the Game Changers movie? Maybe mail us and let us know. We have 2 listener questions that we're going to read. First one by Sydney K.
Yeah, so Sydney sent us quite a long email, so I'm just going to read parts of it that we thought were relevant. And I really think that this is an important one for us to discuss because I really felt for Sydney in this email. So she said, "Hi, I love your show. Everything you say is like the same things I've been thinking. I'm so glad I found you.
Oh,
I'm in the US and I've been vegan for a year. I've been watching Meet the Victims and Smash Speciesism and Lonely Vegans and Animal Resistance, etc. I think this type of activism is amazing. There isn't a lot of activism opportunities where I live. I did AV for a while, but I'm now horrified by the sexism and racism and their stance on intersectional vegans. So I've stopped doing cubes. Yay.
those damn intersectionals.
I basically don't want to associate with any large organizations and love how you guys advocate for people to break away from large organizations." She also goes on to say, "I'm really the only one around here that ever organizes any activism and only like 6 people ever show up." Later on in her email, she says, "The people that show up to AV Cubes never even show up to the actions I plan." Sydney then goes on to say, "I'll direct message hundreds of people and either they'll ignore me or they'll say they show up and don't." She also says, "I so desperately want to do animal liberation work. I can't do a lockdown on my own." She's trying to get young people excited about activism, but that's quite hard. And as she says, "I'm 34 and I'm the youngest one there by far. So when a young person does show up, they never come back. I just think the way the world is, people want to be involved with things where younger people are involved, I guess." Then she says, "For example, this is the most annoying thing. When Earthling Ed came to my city about a year ago, 300 people came from 4 different states. So frustrating. These people never come to anything else. I'll message activists that I know are activists and seeing if we can maybe collaborate, and no one answers me. I think it's because I don't have a big social media following and people just don't seem to want to bother with me because I'm not well known or a celeb." She also goes on to say, "I'm just heartbroken because I want to help the animals so much, but one person can't go on animal rescues on farms alone, and one person can't do a slaughterhouse lockdown. What should I do? How do I get people interested? How do I find a reliable team?" She says, "I'm not really expecting you to answer me. No one else ever does.
Oh, man.
But you said you answer your emails, and I just feel so connected to everything you guys talk about." Then later on, she says, "Sorry, this email was so long. I just wanted to explain that I'm trying really hard. So I just can't imagine what else I could possibly do to get people involved. I've thought about asking schools around here if I could speak about veganism there. Maybe that will help find people. Love, Sydney."
Thanks for that awesome email, Sydney.
So that was just a summary of her email. What would you respond, Pete?
So I would advise that you become a straight white male and get tattoos. Talk about supporting Burger King.
Start
and
a CBD oil
sell
company.
CBD oil. And go on a holiday and talk about vibrations and energy and stuff.
And try to look like Jesus.
Yeah, if you could also, yeah. So there you go, Sydney. Easy.
Or just start a cult
Yeah, you could start a cult.
and welcome everyone, especially the fascists.
Yeah, be very inclusive. No.
On a serious note, we empathize with you,
Yeah.
Sydney. We really do.
I think that we've both had very similar issues here in South Africa with getting people to participate in stuff. So really on a lot of your points, we feel you. And one of the reasons why we started this podcast was because we felt frustrated that nothing was really happening that we thought was effective. And so
people were also more, this was something that I didn't read out from the email, but also going to like vegan meetups where people care more about food than anything else. That happens here a lot as well, where people are all about vegan products and vegan markets and look at this cool new food that I tried and that's it.
And I promise you, if Earthling Edge showed up, you would have hundreds of people.
Thousands of people.
So, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what advice to give other than finding other people online in your area. But Sydney's tried that. She messages hundreds of people and no one responds to her. So it's really difficult.
But also, I think that the idea to maybe go speak at schools is a really good idea. Reaching young people and a lot of kids at once could be a really good idea. And that's something you can do by yourself.
Yeah. I actually think what you're doing right now is great. The fact that you're messaging people, you being really proactive, you being really creative about your ideas and everything, I think is awesome. You know, an idea that we've also had here that we haven't tried out yet is getting involved with more craftivism type stuff. So that's something to look into.
For anyone who doesn't know what craftivism is, it's basically things you can do, especially if you're more of an introvert, where you can do things related to any kinds of craft, whether it's knitting or painting or drawing or, you know, whatever it might be, and do activism through those methods. So what some people do is write little vegan messages and fold them up on little pieces of paper with drawings or whatever you want to do, and go into shops and put them into pockets of clothing that people buy. And then when they get home, they get a little message saying watch this documentary, or, you know, little messages like that. So there's lots of things you can do.
You can leave them in books.
Yeah, in bookstores, in libraries. You know.
You aren't going to get in trouble for adding something and leaving something there.
Yeah, leaving a little present for later.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, I guess, sticker activism. Kind of combine those words. I don't know if stickerism is a real thing, but anyway.
I don't think that's a very good word combo.
Yeah, sorry. But yeah, I mean, so Sydney lives in New York City, so...
Well, near New York City.
Near New York City. So if anyone's from there and wants to get in touch with Sydney, mail us and we'll put you in touch. Maybe there's a bunch of other people like Sydney that just haven't heard about what she's wanting to do.
Maybe there's a lot of people also feeling frustrated.
Yeah.
But I also just want to say, I understand the frustration in feeling overwhelmed, just really wanting to do something on a very practical level. And I totally relate to that and I understand that. And I know it's frustrating wanting to do something like an actual liberation and help rescue a physical animal. But if that's not something that's within the realm of possibility right now, that's also okay. There's a lot of work that can be done. You know, maybe also get in touch with rescue centers. Even if they're more welfare-based groups, there's still a lot that you can do in terms of like wildlife rehabilitation or fostering animals that need it. That's all really valuable work, working with individual animals as well. And I don't think you should get disheartened if the kind of activism you really desperately want to do is not being well received where you are. It sucks that people respond more to the vegan celebrities and the well-known activists with big followers. It's a shitty culture, but that's the reality of it. So yeah, I just think, you know, don't be too hard on yourself. You're trying, and eventually you'll find the right people who can do actions with you, and you'll find the right form of activism that you're able to do where you are with what you have and really feel like you're making a difference. The most important thing I would say is to not get disheartened and give up.
Yeah, and I would look at other social justice movements outside of veganism for inspiration as well, to see what they're doing. I also would suggest trying to just think about and reframe the ways that we think about activism, because I think at the moment we really glorify things like lockdowns and things like that. And while those things are good, they also come with really serious consequences, such as getting arrested, getting seriously injured. And I'm not going to downplay those things at all. I fully support anyone who's willing to put their safety and their life on the line. But as Terence said, it's not the only form of activism, and it is just one form of activism. So we don't need to constantly be doing liberations and lockdowns only to be getting us all put in jail. You know?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You know, in your email, Sydney, you mentioned that some of the activists that do show up aren't willing to get arrested or do anything outside of the law. And while I admire the fact that that's less of an issue for you and you are fine to do those kind of things, it is a very real risk that you need to consider, because if you do end up in jail, that hugely limits what you'll be able to do in terms of activism. So I think also just being really serious about those considerations as well.
Yeah, I think it's a problem that, and it seems to be kind of timelessly tied to Extinction Rebellion and the whole glamorization of getting arrested. It's not a cool thing to get arrested, honestly. I wish that we would get rid of that.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say. Hopefully someone who's listening maybe has some ideas. If you do, please send them to us and we'll forward them along to Sydney and maybe mention them in another episode for anyone else who's feeling like this. But I'm pretty confident to say that most activists have felt like this at some point. I know I have. I'm sure you have, Pete.
Yeah.
So you're definitely not alone in that. And you can always email us if you want to chat about things that you feeling isolated or feeling unsure about. We always down to have a conversation about it. So just know that you don't have to feel alone, even if you seem to be in some situations.
Yeah, and one more thing, I just wanted to say well done to Sydney for not kind of just giving in and joining one of the like massive problematic organizations that are around, like AV or DXE or something, and trying to be creative in ways that you can do advocacy and activism that is effective. You have the right idea.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that we often speak about, that it's sometimes better to take a step back than to just get involved in anything that's happening just because it's happening, and then, you know, kind of inadvertently contributing to something that's actually harmful.
Yeah.
Like we've all seen some of the harmful stuff that AV's doing. So if you had just been like, oh, well, that's the only thing happening, I might as well join, then you might be contributing to actual harm rather than good. So
yeah, I mean, that phrase, doing something is better than nothing, should not apply to animal rights activism.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that email, Sydney, and we will always reply if you email us, even if it takes us a bit of time.
Yeah, not that we're getting lots of emails. We just are quite busy in our everyday lives.
Don't be modest, Pete. We get hundreds every day. No, we don't. We also did have another email, though, from Mark.
So Mark said, hey, I've been really enjoying your podcast. Only listened to the first 2 episodes, but I'm slowly working my way through. I was wondering what your thoughts were about the above activism. So he included a video clip from Lonely Vegans. I heard you talk about putting ourselves through unnecessary trauma and the idea of bearing witness being a draining process with the exception of moderation. So what are your thoughts on this and the Meet the Victims style activism?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Lonely Vegans is an Instagram account where they go into farms and get footage of the animals up close and they spend time with them. And the specific post that Mark sent to us, I wanted to look at that post specifically and look at the wording that was used so we can kind of unpack that and talk about that a little bit. So the post that he referred to, and we can link to this in the show notes as well, but it was a post about 2 pigs who they named Walter and Dylan. And some of the words that they used in the caption were that they want to be with them in these dark corners and suffer with them. Of course, we will never suffer in the ways they are. They want to try and offer them something that will distract them, love, hugs, kisses. Quote, sit with them in the filth. We try to not only bear witness, but literally take in the life they live for a few hours each time we go. We turned around and they were behind us. Then later they go on to say they spent days calling animal rights activists trying to get them out. And they said that when the pigs tried to follow them out, they will think we just let them down. So they're basically talking about the bonds that they formed with these pigs while they were there and how bad they felt that they tried really hard to call different organizations and try and rescue them and it just didn't happen, and how heartbreaking it was to sit with them in the dark for all those hours and then for them to follow them out or try to follow them out and feeling like they had kind of abandoned them like all other humans they've come in contact with. So in general, I think that what they're doing with their page is valuable in its own right, and you know, they getting footage that's very real and very much what these animals are enduring. But I worry about the extent of what they're doing and whether it's actually necessary. I think it's harmful to them, the individuals doing this, and not necessarily helpful to the animals either. Although I do completely understand the drive to try and offer them some level of comfort and love. And you can see in the posts that they make, the negative effects on them as individuals regarding anger, for example. There's a lot of anger towards humanity. There's a lot of like trauma, I guess is the best word to explain it, but it's grueling to be doing this so often. So I really empathize with that anger, and I empathize with the desire to go and do this, but I just don't think it's always helpful. I think that anger can manifest in a way that comes across very negatively to the people that we're trying to reach with this kind of footage. And I also wonder how many non-vegans are seeing it, how many people are actually receptive to what they're doing, and is it worth the kind of burnout and stress that these people are putting themselves under to go and get these stories and these images? I don't know what you think, Pete.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think maybe they're trying to achieve kind of what Dominion did. You know, like if you're a vegan and you see it, for some people, maybe it will, motivate you, like reawaken the sense of injustice you feel at what is being inflicted on non-human animals. And in that way, it can be a driver. I find it quite difficult to see the posts, and I quickly scroll past. Just like I feel like a lot of vegans who are very active don't need to watch Dominion. I think that sometimes it would be cool to include footage or pictures of liberated and animals actually happy. But yeah, I don't have too much to add from what you're saying. I think it does. I don't think anger is a negative thing. I mean, you and I are pretty angry, and this podcast is pretty angry. And I think that anger is a motivating emotion versus, say, like if you're sad, you're not going to be very motivated to do something.
The anger that I'm talking about, though, is when you see some of their posts and how incredibly angry they are in general with the state of affairs, and really kind of to the point of rage and hatred to how humans treat non-human animals. And I completely empathize with it, and I understand. I just think that sometimes I feel like I can see from the posts that it's harmful to them as individuals, and it could be harmful to the way that message comes across and is received by other people. It's not just a simple, I'm angry, I'm motivated to do something. It's an all-consuming anger.
Yeah, and I think that does come from, it's telling when you quoted them saying, be with them in these dark corners and suffer with them. Of course, we will never suffer in the ways they are. So I do really like, unlike people who do a fast for a day and think they know what it's like to be a non-human animal in a factory farm system, I do like that they at least acknowledge, of course, we will never suffer in the ways they are. The problem is what conclusion you reach from that. So if you say, we will never suffer in the ways they are, is it just an acknowledgement, or are you self-flagellating?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Are you feeling anger towards yourself even for not suffering like the animals suffer? And if so, I feel like that is not helpful. It can be counterproductive because the non-human animals being exploited don't want to suffer. And there's no reason that you suffering will help that end.
Yeah, that's kind of why I included the words specifically from the post that Mark sent us, because I related a lot to what was said, but I really don't like the phrases like, we suffer with them. I don't think that's necessary. And I understand the motivation behind it is a good one. And I understand wanting to be there with them and sit with them to try and understand, but also as an ally, essentially. But the fact of the matter is you can still go home and they can't. And I agree that to an extent it can be self-flagellation. And I think that it's unnecessary to have to sit in the filth with them and try and experience that. Because that's what it comes across as. It comes across as, we will never know what they feel. We know that we're not suffering the way that they are, but we're going to try experience that. And that, I think, is damaging.
Yeah, especially if you're already vegan and being active and already are aware of how much suffering is happening.
And I did see in one post they got criticized for kind of taking selfies because they were in some of the images, which I disagree with because, as they rightfully pointed out, it's not a selfie. They weren't like dressed up. They had their faces partially covered, literally just showing the setting and I think giving a bit of perspective in being there. That said, I still don't think it was necessary for them to be in the image at all. And I think sometimes it can be more powerful to just see the reality that the animals are, experiencing, the non-human animals are experiencing without any human intervention, because it's not really an intervention. And I'm not trying to criticize them for being in any of the photos, because I don't think it was any kind of like narcissistic anything. But I just think this idea of we are sitting in the filth with them to try and experience this with them it's just not necessary.
I'm not sure I 100% agree on them not being in the photos. I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about. But for example, I find it pretty motivating watching old ALF footage and seeing pictures of like members of the ALF holding dogs and holding rabbits and stuff. I don't think it's at all the same as, say, like James Aspie or something. If they're anonymous, do you know what I mean? Like their faces are covered. They are obviously there only for the animals. And in a way, to me, it's kind of like showing that allyship.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
They aren't going to get likes based on their muscles or their face or their tattoos,
That's what I mean, is that you can see it's not a narcissistic anything, but I can see the point that it's not entirely necessary, because they're not liberating the animals, they're just sitting there. Yeah. But I do think that it can give perspective. When you can think about yourself sitting there with them, I think, maybe it does give a bit of perspective. And like I said, I'm not criticizing them for that, but it was just a point that was raised. And if those photos are making people think, maybe I should also be there suffering with them, I think that is a bit of a problem. Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I just feel it feels quite difficult to criticize, because I think that the people doing Lonely Vegans are probably really, really good people. Totally. And have really good intentions. And I really appreciate them in their activism. And I also really empathize with that like misanthropic rage at what human beings have inflicted on non-human animals. So hopefully no one will be offended by this, but our critique, I guess, is more one of like a reminder for self-reflection than like criticizing anyone's form of activism.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I think that what they're doing is valuable in its own right, for sure. I do wonder, as I said, how many non-vegans are getting exposed to these images, and I hope it's a lot, because I do think that the images that they've captured are really powerful, and I do think that what they're doing is important, and I do think that it's admirable that they're going there and spending these hours, and they obviously really, really care, and they're very passionate about this, and I admire that, I really do. And I think that what they're doing is a good thing. My main concern is really self-care, and whether they are overextending themselves to the point of traumatizing themselves unnecessarily and making them possibly get to the point where they're not effective.
Like burnout.
Exactly. So that would be, if they ever listen to this, I don't know if they would, but if you're doing this kind of stuff, I would really just say, please just look after yourself, because you're doing valuable work, and I think it's important. And I don't think that Lonely Vegan specifically is at all a narcissistic attempt at anything like that. Not at all. That's not what we're trying to say at all. But I do just think, please just look after yourself, basically.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. Take care of yourself and realize that self-flagellation is not going to help the animals.
So moving on to our main discussion, which is related to what we've spoken about already. But today we thought we'd discuss some of the different forms of activism, like we've started doing. Specifically things that have been talked about a lot lately and that have had a bit of controversy surrounding them, and just looking at how these might come across, particularly to non-vegans, because we tend to see a lot of arguing and debates among vegans about what is the right and wrong way to do things. And we thought we'd just discuss, how often are we really considering how the average non-vegan person is seeing these things? Are they seeing these things? Are they engaging with the images? Are they engaging with the footage? And really, what impacts are these kinds of activism having on bringing about real systemic change?
Yeah, so let's get into it. I guess lots of people recently have been discussing a post made by James Aspie in a slaughterhouse in Bali, where he shared a photo of himself posing with his arms crossed next to some pigs that were being slaughtered. Christopher Sebastian wrote a post about this, which I think raised some really important points, and we can add a link to this in the show notes. But what do you think of this thing that James did?
Firstly, I was pretty horrified at how many people were just praising James.
Don't you know he invented veganism?
But so many people were like, oh, you're so amazing, James. Oh, that must have been so hard. You're so, wow. Anyway, it annoys me so much. But understandably, a lot of vegans, though, were outraged by what he did. If you haven't seen the photo, James is posing as if he's doing a shoot for a magazine cover while there are pigs being slaughtered behind him. And when he was criticized for doing this and including himself in the photo, he admitted that it was a considered act and that he knows that he will get more reach and engagement if he is in the photo.
So he's exploiting this horrible hero worship thing that we have in the mainstream vegan movement.
Yeah. So what really annoys me about this is that he fails to see how completely self-centered and arrogant that is. He will get more engagement. Yes, he will. He's right. But what message is he reinforcing by playing into that? He's essentially shifting focus away from animals who are being murdered onto himself because he knows that people want to look at him.
Yeah, it's super narcissistic and speciesist, actually.
It's appalling that he can't see how disgusting that is. He's literally doing the opposite of what he claims to be doing. He's saying that he's there for animal liberation. He's saying he wants people to see what's happening. But then what he's doing is he's saying, actually, if my face is in the photo, more people will look at it, which means people are looking at him, not what's happening. So he's taking the attention away from the fact that there are animals being murdered right next to him and saying, look at me in my man pose.
Yeah, it's not even like the pigs are in focus and he's like there with the composition of the photo. He is the focus of the photo.
They could have put that photo on the cover of a, I don't know, Meat Inspectors Monthly magazine. I don't know if that's a thing, but that it looks like it could be a thing. Like our latest recruit, James Aspie, looks on as he inspects the quality control. And, that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah,
it's horrendous.
It's for sure. I thought I would share some of the things that were said in the Christopher Sebastian article, which I said we'll link to in the show notes. But it says, photojournalists have been taking pictures of atrocities for nearly as long as the camera has existed. And at this time, I honestly cannot recall a photographer who has documented war crimes by way of the selfie.
Thank you, Christopher.
However, we don't even have to journey into the realm of war crimes. Photojournalist and humane educator Joanne MacArthur is known for her We Animals project, a photography project documenting human relationships with animals. According to her Wikipedia page, MacArthur conceived of the We Animals project around 1998 after an encounter with a macaque monkey chained to a windowsill in Ecuador. She photographed the monkey as she was appalled at the treatment and, quote, knew that the way she saw our treatment of animals was important and she wanted to share that point of view. I'll repeat that last part. MacArthur said she wanted to share the animal's point of view. And this is, I think, at the heart of any criticism, not a conspiracy against James Aspie. Animals are quite capable of telling their own stories and can do so more authentically than we ever could without the need of our intervention if we create the conditions for them to do so.
Exactly.
Nailed it again, as Christopher Sebastian always does.
I don't even know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can add to what he said.
Please don't take a selfie when animals are being killed. So the next action that we wanted to discuss was from a newish Belgian-based group called Animal Resistance, not the same one we've mentioned before from Instagram, but they're a non-profit organization which is against all forms of oppression towards humans and non-human animals, and they're mainly focused on speciesism. So that all sounds great. And the first action they did was to shut down a foie gras farm. So as an extension of that shutdown, they also did a demonstration in a supermarket where they had posters, and I think they displayed some footage as well. And they had activists sitting in the supermarket with all of these posters. But then two of the activists were also acting out basically the force feeding that takes place in foie gras farms with ducks. So this was very visually disturbing, I found, and not for the right reasons. So what they were doing basically is there was a male activist standing behind a female activist who was on her knees and kind of screaming and moaning, and she was chained up and I think chained to the other activist sitting on the floor as well.
And she was kind of like holding the guy's legs.
That I found really disturbing. She had her hands behind her back, holding the back of his calves, essentially, I think.
Yeah.
And he was standing behind her with this like feeding tube.
Holding it up.
Holding
with
it
going
up.
into her mouth.
Yes, and standing behind her, and kind of, it looked like he was pushing her in the back with his knees almost. And the whole thing really was quite reminiscent to me of like a sexual assault type scene. It was just really, really not great visually.
Like they were moving like in a sexual way. I don't know how to explain the movement.
It was like he was kind of kneeing her in the back,
But
like
like-
force feeding her. But she
like,
was
like rhythmically.
yes, and
That's
she
what
was
I mean.
she was like resisting and kind of squirming around, but also holding his legs, which didn't make sense to me at all.
Yeah.
Almost like for balance, but it made it look it looked like a sexual assault scene.
Yeah.
And we're not the only ones who thought this. A lot of people were uncomfortable by it. We actually asked for some responses on Instagram, and a lot of people felt the same thing. And in one of their posts, they actually said, just to clarify, these are consenting adults that agreed to do this action. And I saw someone commenting saying, thank goodness you gave that warning, because when I first saw it, I was like horrified, like what is happening here? And that's not great.
And it also wasn't accurate from the one comment we got, because foie gras is only done on male ducks, right?
Yeah, foie gras is essentially produced from male ducks, and the females are bred for meat.
Yeah, so this is a woman being force-fed.
Yeah, so that in itself is inaccurate. And it's shocking to me that they didn't realize the optics of that, like a man standing behind a woman, force-feeding her in this way. And it had this very like sexual politics of meat through and through,
Yeah, big
basically.
time. Shout out to Carol Adams.
Yeah, exactly. So it made me really uncomfortable, and I thought it was just really something that I think would possibly trigger people who have suffered different kinds of trauma, especially sexual assault. And I don't think it portrayed the message that they were going for.
Yeah.
Also, just going back to the shutdown of the actual farm, there was a lot of criticism for that as well. There were a lot of activists that went in and chained themselves. And I think that was really good that they did that they shut down the farm. But
Also causing the farm like some financial implications probably.
yeah, for sure. But they were also criticized because they actually stressed the animals out a lot more. A lot of the footage they got, ducks that were injured with bloody feet and injured wings and things like that. A lot of people criticized them and said that some of that damage was actually done because of the way they went in there, and the fact that they were really stressing the ducks out and making them flap their wings and getting more injured in the cages. So I have no doubt that some of those injuries were there before. Like there was a duck with a hole in their beak, which obviously is a long-term thing. They said that it was related to the force feeding, which is obviously terrible. And I think it's good that they got footage, and it's good that they did the shutdown. But I also think that they didn't maybe plan it as well as they could have.
Yeah. Because foie gras itself is like fucking horrible. It's such a horrible form of farming.
Yeah. I mean, it's all shit, but this is particularly like repugnant. And it's such a like privileged luxury, like literally just a disgusting display of wealth and arrogance and just horrible exploitation. So on the whole, I think it's good that they did the shutdown. I think they could have planned it better. I think the optics of what they did at the supermarket were really terrible.
Yeah.
But we did actually, after we asked for feedback on our Instagram stories, we got a message from one of the activists that actually took part. And they said that a lot of the activists that took part actually realized how it looked like while it was going on. And they said that if they had to do it again, they would reverse roles, which to their credit is a good thing. But in my opinion, why would you do that again?
I personally don't understand why it's more effective to like cause a disruption in a supermarket and enact something than to just not enact it and still just be in the supermarket disrupting. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure how it shows or how it's effective.
Yeah, I guess what they're trying to do is show what really happens and get people to empathize with it and imagine if it was happening to humans. But I personally really don't like any kind of reenactments or, you know, dressing up as animals or like the classic Peter, you know, lie there covered in blood kind of actions. I don't like that. Yeah, I personally think that it belittles the actual suffering of the non-human animals that you're trying to represent. I understand the motivation behind it and that you're trying to bring some kind of like shock value and get people to realize, oh, these are living beings that this is happening to and it's horrible, and get them to kind of empathize. But I just think it's kind of making a mockery out of what these animals are going through in making a kind of theatrical display of it by reenacting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's often also, it reminds me of what people do when they dress up as animals in animal suits with blood splattered on them outside of fur shops and stuff. It's like also can look quite silly.
And often it gets mocked by non-vegans. And again, how are we looking to non-vegans? It doesn't matter if vegans are like, oh, that's such a powerful demonstration.
Yeah, and comparing them, I think it could actually be more harmful if someone says who's not vegan comes in and they're like, what is that guy doing with that woman? That could be more harmful than just looking silly, because then it's like, what are they doing? You know, it's like, I don't know. It's like a weird thing to think about for me. I agree with you about reenacting things, you know.
And think about it. If you had no idea what foie gras was and how it's produced and how the ducks are force-fed, and you had to see a demonstration like that, my first reaction would be like, what the fuck? Like, that's gross. What are you doing?
Yeah, do you not think it would have been more effective to just show footage?
Yeah, totally. I definitely think so.
Because you're not then representing the non-human animals.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Christopher Sebastian said in relation to James Aspey, that animals can tell their own stories. We don't need to tell them on their behalf. We certainly don't need to reenact their tragedies and their traumas. We are there as allies, and it's not our place to dress up as them or to, try and reenact their trauma. I just find it really insulting, actually. But like I said, someone from the demonstration did actually reach out to us, and they did say, although they said they would reverse roles if they did it again, which I don't agree with, just don't do it. But they also did say that the organizers were very open to feedback, and that they actually cancelled another action because some people felt uncomfortable with what was going to happen. So I appreciate that, and it's good to know that they listen to criticism and feedback and will kind of change their strategy accordingly. So that's cool, and if that's the case, then I look forward to seeing what they do next.
Yeah. Should we talk about this latest $1 million vegan campaign?
We should.
Cranky Vegan have spoken about it, and so did Tofu Steve on his Beyond Species podcast, but we thought we'd speak about it as well and offer some of our perspectives. So for those who don't know, according to their website, $1 Million Vegan is a non-profit campaign seeking to introduce people to the benefits of a plant-based diet for their health, the environment, sustainability, and animals. With the support of veterans, doctors, and some very well-known names, we encourage world leaders to lead by example and show how eating a delicious vegan diet can protect health as well as benefit the planet and animals. They, earlier this year, offered the Pope $1 million to go vegan for Lent.
But not for him, $1 million to the charity of his choice if he went vegan for Lent.
So we should actually be using plant-based here, because no, you can't go vegan for 1 month. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they say vegan, but it's obviously plant-based diet.
So their latest one is offering Trump $1 million to go plant-based for January. And while it looks like they have a massive amount of support, I think that this is beyond embarrassing.
The condition for Trump is that if he goes plant-based for January, they will give $1 million to veterans.
Well, to a veteran charity of his choice.
Yeah. So they've decided on veterans because they think that Trump supports veterans, and that's an important cause to him that he will be willing to go plant-based for. So there is a lot to unpack with this campaign, and there's so much wrong with this, but targeting someone like Trump alone is a major issue.
Yeah.
Their messaging to me almost sounds satirical. Like in some of their videos, they speak about how, firstly, let's make America healthy again, which I'll get into in a second. But they speak about him as an important man. So they want him to go vegan because he's an important man. Important for who? I don't think he's important.
I'm assuming that they mean like he holds heavy political power.
Yeah, but they also then say like, oh, but Trump has children and he, we want him to be healthy, and putting him on this pedestal like we need him around. No, we don't.
I don't really care if Trump's healthy or not.
Yeah, he should just disappear. But anyway, so They seem to frame it as the strategy in which they target people with a huge influence, like you said. And it seems to me like they're also trying to appeal to people who are not generally very likely to be considering veganism. And to me, that logic is just really, really flawed. So they say they want to raise awareness about veganism, but what they're really doing is raising awareness only for the donation, the cause that they're giving this $1 million to, because it's not the gesture of eating plant-based for a month that's really going to get any hype. They're shifting the focus away from discussions of speciesism and animal rights and making it like a means to an end. So basically bribing Trump and saying, if you do this task, i.e. eat plant-based for a month, we will give $1 million to this cause that's important to you. And, therefore the focus shifts to veterans. And to me, that just diminishes animal rights as a worthy cause in itself. It's like saying we have to bribe you with this donation to a cause that's actually important to you, and in so doing we want you to do this task of going plant-based for a month. So they're setting it up as this big deal, like you went plant-based for a month, that's such a big deal that we're going to give $1 million to you. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's such a nothing thing, and it reminds me of a game show. If you complete this challenge, we'll donate to a charity. And it's like you're taking the focus off entirely to someone who has enough fucking money to donate anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's worth over $3 billion. Like, $1 million is nothing for him. Why not? And why not just donate the $1 million directly yourselves?
Exactly. So, I think it's ridiculous to kind of bribe him when he could make that donation himself. Like, why would he personally be persuaded by this campaign? Why do you think someone as arrogant as Trump would be like, oh no, they're going to make me look bad if I don't do this, so I better go plant-based for a month? Because if he was really worried about his reputation, he would just make the donation himself. He has no reason to agree to it. And even if he did, what would that say? Like, what are you trying to achieve? You making people have a higher regard for him for something he can do anyway. He can go plant-based anyway, and he can make a donation anyway. So why are you patting him on the back and saying like, oh, if you do this, you're such a great guy because you're helping veterans and you're helping animals? Like, why would you want to get more public support for someone like him for a completely insincere gesture? He's not doing it because he really cares, because if he really cares, he would make a donation. He's not doing it because he cares about animals, because if he did, he would go vegan. So like, what are you doing?
He's actually shown, even with veterans, that he doesn't give a shit about them.
Yeah.
So I don't understand the point of this. To me, it actually has like a very conservative kind of right-wing feel. And like Tofu Steve actually pointed out very well in the Beyond Species podcast, is veganism has always been a radical movement centered in progressive politics. And do we really want someone like Trump to be associated in any way with veganism? I don't think that Trump going vegan is going to influence anyone else to go vegan. Not that he would ever go vegan. Maybe he would adopt a plant-based diet. I really, really doubt that. And I wouldn't care anyway, for one. But also, he would probably lie about it, even if he agreed to get money. I mean, honestly, he's a piece of shit. And like, we don't need someone like Trump or anyone who supports him to be associated with veganism.
Yeah.
What really bothers me about $1 Million Vegan, if you look at all of the comments, the captions, the founders who comment on stuff, they keep saying when challenged that they are non-political. That really, like, for me is a red flag. Because really I only ever hear people use the term non-political who are very right-wing or call themselves centrists. Because you cannot be non-political. Everything is political. And they contradict themselves when they say they are non-political, but then say things like, quote, I love this guy's protective attitude, a true patriot.
And that's speaking about one of the veterans who does a little promo video for them.
Yeah, and just that statement itself, if you unpack it, has elements of like a praise of patriarchy, of nation states, especially talking about the US, of war, you know, and then to say you're non-political and then make statements like that is ridiculous. Or to say, quote, President Trump is not only president of this great country. You are calling America great, like MAGA, you know? how much more political do you get than making these statements? I suspect personally that the people involved with $1 Million Vegan, not the kids, because basically the tactic is to use kids and it comes across very cute and they like pretend to be, reenact being politicians. And I suspect that the people behind it, the adults behind it, actually do have a right-wing agenda and are very pro-America, pro-war, pro-troops, pro-Trump, and the idea of an America that the majority of people probably wouldn't like to see. And it really bugs me that they say they're non-political because they are very political.
Yeah, I mean, even in their little promo videos, they've got American flags all over the place, and it's very like pro-war, pro-veteran.
Pro-patriots.
Totally. Yeah, and honestly, the fact that they've even used a slogan that is a direct spin-off of Make America Great Again. They're saying Make America Healthy Again. Come on. Like you literally...
political.
Of course it's political. It's like, to me, it reminds me of people saying they're not political and just saying, oh, but all lives matter.
Oh, that's so
like,
racist.
Come
honestly.
on. You're doing the same thing and saying like, no, we're not political at all. We're just going to do a little spin-off of this slogan and, use it to our advantage.
I mean, I doubt America was ever healthy, just like they were never great. Anyway, so they also said, quote, President Trump is a passionate supporter of our veterans and their charities, and the vast majority of Americans believe our veterans deserve respect and honor. Very, again, like pro-patriot, pro-war, very political. There's another quote in the FAQs when asked what inspired the idea to give someone $1 million is that it was inspired by President Trump's own 2012 offer to donate $5 million to President Obama's chosen charity if he supplied his college records and passport applications. To me, that's a very random inspiration. To me, that sounds like an American right-wing, like anti-Obama stab. Oh, it was inspired by Trump's racism of Obama. When he demanded like, oh, I don't believe that you're American. Show me your birth certificate. I'll pay $5 million. Like, what a weird thing to be inspired by. It's a negative action. And they're using that as the inspiration. Like, don't say you're non-political.
Yeah, exactly. And also what they don't really put any focus on is a lot of people have said, well, what if he doesn't do it? And they kind of say, oh, well, we hope he does. And even if he doesn't, the money will just get shifted to the next campaign or whatever. So I thought to myself, well, what happened after the Pope said no? Because the Pope didn't go vegan. The Pope didn't go plant-based for Lent. So what did they do? And that was like around Feb earlier this year.
Yeah, you can't find out anything online about that.
Yeah, I've looked, like, what happened to the money? Did they donate it? How did they respond? And all I could find is, the Pope sending blessings and all of this, but he didn't agree to do it. So I've tried to look and I can't find any info about whether or not the money was donated. I'm assuming it wasn't. So by what they've said on their website, it sounds like they just kept it for the next campaign, being Trump. What have they actually been doing, sitting on this $1 million and just kind of waiting around for this campaign? So they have a screenshot of their bank account to prove that they have the $1 million, which has all of $16 in excess. So where is the interest that they've gained for this entire year?
$1,016,000.
Yeah. So where's the interest that they've earned? That to me is bizarre.
It's not possible that you could leave $1 million in a bank account and it generates $16 interest.
Exactly. And also, how unethical is it that they have this money and they're waiting for their next little campaign when they could be donating that to an organization like Food Empowerment Project or to a sanctuary, people who are actually doing work for animal liberation and making a difference that could benefit enormously from $1 million. But they're sitting on it and waiting for some so-called influential person to agree to a bribe, essentially, to give that money to a non-animal related charity. What is the point of that? I really don't understand it. It actually disgusts me that they're just sitting with this money, having their own little game show. And you know what? I understand that the kids they probably have good intentions and, it's kind of a cute campaign for them or whatever. But what are these kids learning from this?
Yeah.
They're literally being the literal poster children for a campaign that's currently doing nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing.
And I mean, another thing that bothered me was that they said they'll give the $1 million to veterans charity or charities of President Trump's choice. Like, what do you think Trump is going to choose to donate to? Obviously, it's going to be something that props him up and serves his self-interest, you know? But anyway, I honestly just find this all fucking embarrassing. Actually, the mainstream vegan movement in general at the moment is fucking embarrassing. We actually had a really interesting comment on one of our Facebook posts. And the comment says, "It's this foundation which seems to fund the $1 million campaign. The non-political aspect of mainstream animal advocacy seems to be centered around generating appeals to the right and has been for some time. Most of the philanthropy dollars are also placed in, quote, mainstream campaigning and the various news sites they fund. Sometimes a few crumbs are dropped in different directions, but because they're tied into an, quote, effectiveness ideology, they're fairly determined to place money in certain areas and for certain organizations in order to fit that narrative. And the funding organization is called Blue Horizon. So on their site, bluehorizon.org, which we can link to in the show notes too, shows who they fund, and they have this kind of vague about section where it seems like it's a group or an organization
that invests in like plant-based foods and businesses, and then they invest in activism essentially.
Yeah, so they show $1 Million Vegan on there. One thing that I'm suspicious of is that in the activism section, they have a picture of Anonymous for the Voiceless. And I wonder if they are funding them too, because people often wonder where funds come from. I don't know why they have that random picture of AV on there.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And one of the beneficiaries that are listed is an organization called Those Who Love Peace. And that was founded by one of the regional organizers of AV. So I imagine that that's why, because she's still affiliated with AV, she's still a regional organizer and she's running for Those Who Love Peace. So I guess that's maybe the connection. I don't know if they fund AV directly, but I guess that's a probable link.
Yeah, it's interesting. And one thing that I found really interesting to note is that they fund Earthling Ed. Like
he needs any more
How much money does this guy have? You know what I mean? I mean, I have no idea how he spends his money. But honestly, how much money does he make? Like, he already makes $7,281 per month at the time of recording this episode just from Patreon, which is like 108,000 South African rand per month. That's a lot. And who knows what other sources of income he has. Why are they funding him? Why aren't they funding grassroots organizations? For example, Food Empowerment Project that you mentioned earlier, or people who work with underprivileged communities that also deals with veganism and plant-based eating and growing your own food and stuff like that.
And like we've mentioned before, someone like Earthling Ed, he's one of these kind of celebrity vegans that haven't overtly done problematic stuff in their activism. And he is generally pretty logical and seems to be doing good stuff. And, you know, it was cool that he bought the activism van and all of that stuff. But honestly, the amount of money he's earning far exceeds what he needs to be doing what he's doing. It doesn't cost that much to go around and do a bunch of talks. And although he hasn't been overtly problematic in the way that some of the other vegan kind of celebrity figures have, it is problematic that he has that amount of money and that he has this restaurant, which is supposed to be not-for-profit, and that they are saving up to open a sanctuary. With the amount of money that he's earning, why is he not just giving that to sanctuaries that exist already, that are struggling?
Yeah.
Like maybe there are, but I haven't seen anything to that effect.
I mean, the issue here is that no grassroots activists, and I'm guessing the majority of grassroots organizations and sanctuaries, don't make as much money as this individual makes per month.
Exactly.
In terms of donations and whatever. And they are doing like real on the ground grassroots work. It's really worrying. And also, you know, like you mentioned, Earthling Ed, he fits the like, not perfectly because he's not like this big muscular dude or whatever, but he's still this like white male. And he doesn't address any other issues ever. No one knows what Earthling Ed's opinions are on race or gender or anything, because he only speaks about animal rights and has a very single issue veganism. And it's a joke, but also there are lots of memes made where people say stuff like, I'm going to tell my kids this was Jesus. Or like they put up a picture of Earthling Ed in their room or something. It's, in my opinion, extreme and unhealthy hero worship. And I think that it's a problem he doesn't call that out. Like, can you stop glorifying me?
Yeah, and I think he has kind of alluded to that sometimes. Like I've heard him say before, like he's no one special and he's more than happy to help people with tips on activism and whatever. I've heard him say that he's not like any different from anyone else. But the thing is, he is now. He's making a shitload of money off of activism. And like the email that we read earlier from Sydney, saying that when he came to her town, hundreds of activists came there, but won't support a local activist trying to put together actions. That's not okay. And that is a situation where I think someone like him should be speaking up, because it's all fair and well for him to dodge the situation by like, oh, you know, I've never said anything problematic to be called out on, so I've never had to speak on issues of race or gender, for example. But he's had countless opportunities to speak on the issue of hero worship, and he hasn't, as far as I can tell. He should be saying at these events, thank you so much for coming out. I hope you're supporting your local activists as well, because if not, what are you doing here? So I think that's a valid critique, that he has had opportunity to speak about something that is very problematic, and he hasn't done that. He hasn't said stop the hero worshipping. He hasn't said support local activists. He hasn't said, you know what, I made a shitload of money and I don't need it this month, so I'm giving it to Food Empowerment Project. He hasn't done that.
Yeah. Also, don't you think it's infuriating, and I'm sure Sydney can agree, that he comes to the town, he speaks, and like hundreds of people show up? Definitely he would have spoken about how important it is to do activism and get active, and then leaves and no one joins Sydney in activism and being active.
Because she doesn't have a big following.
Yeah, also she doesn't fit the demographic that seemed to be mobilizing everyone. But doesn't it speak for how effective it is if his talks apparently impact people so much, but then they don't?
They're only mobilizing people to come and see him. They're not mobilizing people to do anything after that, and that's a problem.
And then everyone feels like probably fired up and everything until they go to bed. And then Sydney's there the next day saying, hey, I have this idea. Who wants to join me? Like crickets.
Yeah.
You know, I find that
it's frustrating.
It's super frustrating.
Yeah. So the $1 Million Vegan campaign, all sorts of problems, waste of money.
What is happening to the mainstream animal rights movement?
I cannot believe that they have a sponsor of $1 million and that's what they're choosing to do. I mean, the Pope and Trump. I cannot think of two worse people to target.
Oh, in fact, Donald Trump, honestly.
Yeah, anyway.
And speaking of Anonymous for the Voiceless, as you mentioned just now, we just got enlightened to the fact that they had put out this video that they thought is some kind of exemplary outreach of Paul Basher speaking to someone, where he asks them, so what's stopping you from going vegan? And they respond and say, depression. And then he's like, what do you mean? And they respond and say, you know, basically when you have depression, it's really hard to look after yourself. It's hard to cook for yourself other than order takeout and whatever. And he says, that doesn't sound like much of a challenge to me. Like you mentioned earlier to me when we were talking before we were recorded, this is a video clip, if you were leading some kind of outreach group, that you would use as an example of how not to do activism.
Yes, this would be something I would be embarrassed to have filmed, and I would only keep it to show new activists and say, please never ever do this ever. And yet Avi's like, this is great. Let's put this on our social media.
Not only that, but Paul Basher is a co-founder with Acel, and he's being honestly really fucking ableist. And they ask him if he's been depressed, and he says yes. You know, and if you watch the video, it's very obvious that he does not understand depression. The person he's speaking to, are being open and vulnerable with him about experiencing depression and mental health issues. And he's just so dismissive of it. And honestly, really ableist. Like, he's so insensitive about it. And, you know, towards the end, he says animals are the most oppressed group on the planet. And the person he's speaking to throws their arms up and walks away. And Then he says, too much truth for you, too much fucking truth for you. So aggressive, to this person that he's just spoken to. When he's speaking to them, they talk about how their diet is linked to their culture, how they identify with the past and eating what colonizers allow or slave owners allowed slaves to eat. And he doesn't engage at all with that. He doesn't meet them at their level, this person that he's speaking to. And to suddenly say to someone who brings up the issue of slavery, for your next thing to be animals are the most oppressed group on the planet.
Shocking.
It's like, come on, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, think about who you're speaking to.
Yeah, I mean, I found that whole interaction really horrible and shocking. And honestly, I think he lost them immediately. He was being disrespectful immediately. He didn't understand anything about depression. And when you're doing outreach, you really need to meet people where they are. You need to understand the individual experiences and perspectives of the person that you're talking to. And he completely lost that. He disregarded their very real mental health concerns. And instead of being supportive and saying, I can understand the challenges that you must be facing, and trying to offer support, he could have done anything. He could have said, I understand the struggles, and, if this is something that you want to do, but you're not sure where to start, let me know how I can support you. Can I tell you some options for the kind of takeout that you maybe usually order, that you could get a vegan option? He could have done so many things that would not have belittled this person's situation. But instead, he just chose to say, that doesn't sound like a big challenge.
Yeah.
Are you actually kidding me? I cannot even handle how badly he handled that. And he could see from the start that they were not receptive to what he was saying. And instead of taking a step back, changing his strategy and realizing that he fucked up, he just dug himself into a bigger hole and completely belittled their experience. That person is not going to be receptive to any vegan messaging going forward
But
because of that.
Honestly, it's just one more hole in the massive crater that AV have already dug for themselves. The fact that anyone can support Paul or AV or any of these people is beyond me at this point.
They are so ignorant about so many issues. And we posted about this on our Instagram stories earlier, and we got a response from someone saying that they've experienced AV brushing aside similar issues, like people having to get nutrition from feeding tubes. So, for example, someone in critical care in hospital, and a lot of the formulas that are used for kind of tube feeding, or actually probably close on all of them, contain animal products. So saying things like, oh, but anyone can be vegan, it's not that hard. It's overlooking challenges that so many people face, like in these situations where there isn't a vegan option, and AV brushing aside those concerns instead of validating them and saying, yeah, there are situations where it's just not possible. They just brush aside all of that.
Yeah.
Just like saying, if I'm depressed, I can barely get out of bed. Never mind worry about a life-changing thing. I mean, when we were speaking about this earlier, we acknowledged the fact that both of us are vegan already. And both of us have been depressed. So of course we wouldn't compromise our ethics if we are depressed and can't get out of bed, but we are already vegan. To say to someone who's not vegan, change your entire lifestyle while you're depressed and can't even think about actually feeding yourself. Now think about changing everything about how you think about, food and the products you buy and all of that.
You're already struggling to just survive in your own body and just get through the day. And now you make them feel guilty because they aren't prioritizing non-human animals.
He even said, do you prioritize, what was it that he said?
When they ask him, have you been depressed? And he says, yes, but I don't prioritize that over social justice issues.
Exactly. I mean, I can't even begin to explain how completely ignorant
honestly,
that
what a
is.
fool. And how him and Avi can think that this is some kind of exemplary outreach video. Come on.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
How not to do activism.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, and like you mentioned with the feeding tubes thing, that's just one example of what could stop someone. Being depressed and not being able to get out of bed and not being vegan, so not being able to get yourself even into the headspace where you're thinking about others. is another example. When I was looking up the feeding tubes thing, I mean, I didn't do like a lot of research, but from what I could tell, in South Africa, there is no vegan option. In America, there's one, and they have limited options. So what are you going to do? You know, financial restraints. What if you live in a food desert? Like we mentioned earlier, the Food Empowerment Project, they speak a lot about environmental racism. It's really ignorant to blanket statements say it's easy to be vegan. So
yeah, so I mean, all in all, we've discussed quite a few different kinds of activism and the ways that to non-vegans, they might not be as effective as we like to think they would be as vegans within the community seeing this stuff happen. But I think at the end of the day, we just have to really be critical of what we're doing and what others are doing, not just because we want conflict and we want to be so-called divisive, but because we actually want to do things that are effective and that are actually going to somehow contribute to systemic change.
And also create healthier environments for activists to work and live in. For example, Anonymous for the Voiceless, I feel like we would be better off without them.
Yeah.
I think they're harmful for the vegan movement.
Increasingly so as well.
Increasingly so, yeah, all the time. And I think that while thinking about what you just said is important as well, we should also be thinking about who are we associating ourselves with. When you are part of Anonymous for the Voiceless, doing cubes, even in your local town, you are still representing that organization. You are still affiliated with Paul Basher. You're still affiliated with George Martin and his right-wing shit. You are representing these outlooks, these politics. And I think, you know, it confuses me all the time when people, even within AV, acknowledge that there's issues but say, oh, it's not my chapter. Why not just start your own thing? Why do you have to do it under their banner? You know?
But that's what we were saying, I think, in episode 11, when we were speaking about this stuff and saying, like, yeah, we understand that the chapters are run independently, but at some point you have to realize that you're using the same branding, you're using the same associations, and that from the outside, people are going to see people like Paul Bashir saying all this ableist shit and then associating you with that. No matter how well you run your chapter, no matter how sincerely inclusive you are, not George Martin inclusive, actual inclusivity, no matter how considerate you are of other activists and how well thought out your events are, if you're operating under that branding, you are acquiescing to everything that they stand for. And it's that simple.
Yeah. On the promising side, we have heard from a few people that their local AV chapters have dropped the branding of AV and started their own collectives.
Yeah.
Which
so
is
well
quite
done
cool.
to the people who are doing that.
Even someone in Greece who messaged us, which was pretty cool.
So yeah, be critical. Think about how you come across when you're doing activism. Think about how the people you support are coming across. Think about their motives and just...
Basically just think
Yeah.
and be self-reflective. And when we say be critical, you need to be self-critical as well, constantly. If you are part of a collective or group, you should be self-reflecting and being self-critical constantly to make sure that everything is okay. And be wary of the term, like we've said before, for the animals. Because as much as this movement's focus, as Roger Yates says, is on the animals, the scope is much larger and includes oppression of all animals, including humans. And it's going to be better for the animals if we have healthier environments. The fact is that animal rights activists are humans. So human rights issues affect animal rights activists and they affect the environment of animal rights activism.
And one of the points that we've kind of mentioned in passing before, but I think Jake from the Cranky Vegan mentioned in his video that we're going to link in the show notes, he summed it up really well. You know, when you think about inclusivity the way George Martin frames it, and he says, you know, if we exclude men's rights activists, they're going to be sitting on the couch doing nothing. And he kind of explains it like, well, yeah, if you include the right-wing fascists, yeah, they'll show up. But you know who won't show up? All the groups that feel oppressed and unsafe because of the presence of those people. So the 10 dudes you're getting off their couch to come to activism means 100 people sitting on their couch because they don't feel welcome. So I think that's a really important point to consider.
Specifically when he's like, men's rights activists and feminists. So like Jake says, you know, if you invite the men's rights activists and the feminists are going to stop coming.
Yeah, exactly. Also, please don't forget to take care of yourself.
Yeah, it's important to take care of ourselves. It's important to have healthy environments to live and work in, to be more effective for animals in the long run, human and non-human.
So take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and until next time,
Love and liberation.